I'm Madeline, 56 years old, and I thought I had my life figured out. That Thursday evening, I was sitting at my son David's dinner table, laughing with my daughter in law Sarah over her famous roasted chicken. The warm kitchen felt like home, filled with the sounds of family conversation and clinking silverware. Then my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Mr. Peterson, and his voice was shaking. Madeline, are you home right now? He asked urgently. No, I'm having dinner at my son's house, I replied confused. His next words made my blood run cold. Then who is in your house right now? I can see lights moving around inside. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will show you how trust can be shattered in ways you never expect. My life had been peaceful for the past 3 years, since my husband Frank passed away from a sudden heart attack. I'd learned to live alone in our two-story house in the quiet suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. The neighborhood was the kind where everyone knew each other, where children rode bikes safely down tree-lined streets, and where the biggest worry was usually someone leaving their garbage cans out too long. David, my 32-year-old son, worked as a software engineer at a tech company downtown. He'd married Sarah 2 years ago, and I couldn't have asked for a better daughter-in-law. Sarah was 28, with auburn hair and the kindest green eyes I'd ever seen. She had this wonderful way of making everyone around her feel special and loved. What I treasured most about Sarah was how she treated me like her own mother. Every weekend she'd call to check on me, sometimes bringing groceries or just stopping by for coffee. When David proposed to her, he told me later that one of the things he loved most was how much Sarah cared about family. She'd grown up without much family herself, so she seemed to cherish ours even more. Our house held decades of memories, and admittedly, quite a few valuable items. Frank had been a collector of antique pocket watches, and his collection was worth nearly $20,000. There were also pieces of jewelry that had been passed down through my family, including my grandmother's diamond ring, worth about $15,000. I kept the most valuable items in a small safe in our bedroom closet, something Frank had installed years ago. Mr. Peterson, our 70-year-old neighbor, had lived next door for almost 20 years. He'd been Frank's closest friend in the neighborhood, and after Frank died, he'd appointed himself as my unofficial guardian angel. Every morning, he'd wave from his garden, and if he didn't see me for a day or two, he'd call to check up on me. Some might find it intrusive, but I found his concern comforting. The relationship between Sarah and me had grown beautifully over the 2 years since she'd joined our family. She often asked about my day-to-day life, my routines, and even about the security measures Frank had put in place around the house. I'd given her a spare key 6 months after she and David married, telling her it was for emergencies. It felt like a natural gesture of trust and love, welcoming her fully into our family circle. Sarah had hugged me so tightly that day, saying she felt honored to be trusted with something so important. Their weekly dinner invitations had become a cherished tradition. Every Thursday or Friday, Sarah would call and invite me over for a home-cooked meal. She was an excellent cook, much better than I'd ever been, and she always made sure to prepare my favorite dishes. These dinners weren't just about food. They were about family connection, sharing stories, and feeling less alone in a house that sometimes felt too big and too quiet. Looking back now, I realize how completely I'd opened my heart and my life to Sarah. I shared everything with her, from my daily routines to my concerns about living alone, from the location of important documents to the combinations and passwords that secured my most precious belongings. It never occurred to me that such openness might be dangerous. After all, family was family, and trust was the foundation of love. When Mr. Peterson's words sank in the cheerful atmosphere around David's dinner table, instantly evaporated. Lights moving around inside. I repeated my voice, barely a whisper. David immediately stood up his chair, scraping against the wooden floor. "Did you see anyone breaking in?" I asked Mr. Peterson, my hands trembling, as I gripped the phone. Not exactly, he replied, his voice still shaky. But there's definitely someone in there. I noticed a dark sedan parked in front of your house about 30 minutes ago, which was odd since you always park in your driveway. The lights in your living room have been going on and off, and I swear I saw shadows moving past the windows. At first, I thought you'd come home early, but when I saw your car wasn't there, I got worried. David was already grabbing his keys. Mom, we need to call the police right now, he said firmly. Sarah stood up too, her face pale with concern. Oh my goodness, Madeline, this is terrifying. We should all go together for safety. You shouldn't face this alone. My mind raced through all the valuable items in my house. The safe with my grandmother's ring, Frank's watch collection, our important papers, even some cash I kept in a kitchen drawer for emergencies. The thought of strangers rummaging through our personal belongings, touching Frank's things, made me feel sick. Let me call the police, David said, already dialing. Wait, I said, though I wasn't sure why. Something felt strange, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Let me go check first. Maybe Mr. Peterson saw something else. Maybe it's just the automatic lights acting up. Mom, absolutely not, David protested. If someone's in there, you could be walking into a dangerous situation. Sarah moved closer to me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. David's right. Let the police handle this. But we should definitely go with you for support. The 15-minute drive to my house felt like an eternity. My mind kept cycling through worst-case scenarios. What if they'd already taken everything? What if they were still inside when we arrived? Sarah sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, while David drove with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. Do you think they knew you weren't home? Sarah asked softly. How could they? I replied. Unless they'd been watching the house for a while. As we pulled onto my street, everything looked normal. The street lights cast their usual warm glow. Other houses showed signs of typical evening life, and there was no obvious chaos or disturbance. But when we approached my house, I noticed what Mr. Peterson had mentioned about the car. A dark blue sedan was parked directly in front, and it definitely didn't belong to any of my neighbors. There's the car he mentioned. David pointed out, parking across the street. Should we wait for the police? From the outside, my house looked completely normal. No broken windows, no damaged doors, no obvious signs of forced entry. The front porch light was on just as I always left it, and the motion sensor lights hadn't been triggered. If someone was inside, they were being remarkably careful. I just don't understand, I murmured, staring at my home. Everything looks fine. That's when the first seed of doubt crept into my mind. What if Mr. Peterson had been mistaken? What if his aging eyes had played tricks on him? The possibility made me feel foolish for panicking, but it also made the situation feel even more unsettling. If no one was inside, then what had he really seen? Against David's strong protests, I insisted on checking the house myself first, while he and Sarah waited in the car with the engine running, ready to call for help or drive away quickly if needed. My hands shook as I used my key to unlock the front door. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no damaged door frame. Stepping inside, I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice echoed through the empty hallway, and silence answered back. I flipped on the lights and began a careful walkthrough of each room. The living room looked exactly as I'd left it, with the throw pillows arranged neatly on the sofa, and Frank's favorite reading chair positioned just right by the window. The kitchen was spotless, just as I'd maintained it before leaving for dinner. But as I moved more carefully through the space, tiny details began to catch my attention. The throw pillows on the sofa weren't quite right. I was particular about arranging them in a specific way, a habit Frank used to tease me about, and now they seemed slightly off-center. The area rug in front of the fireplace appeared to be shifted about 2 inches to the left. Most unsettling was a water glass sitting on the coffee table half full, and I distinctly remembered washing all the dishes before leaving. In the hallway, I noticed the security system panel showed disarmed at 6:15 p.m. in green letters. That timing made my stomach drop. I'd been at David's house since 5:30, and I certainly hadn't disarmed the system remotely. More importantly, very few people knew the security code. Frank had insisted we keep it private, sharing it only with David, and more recently with Sarah in case of emergencies. The bedroom looked untouched at first glance, but when I checked the walk-in closet, where we kept the small safe, my heart nearly stopped. The safe was still there, still locked, but it had been moved. I knew this because Frank had always positioned it exactly 18 inches from the corner, measured precisely because of his engineering background. Now it sat about 2 feet away, and there were slight scratches around the combination dial that hadn't been there before. When I returned to the car, David immediately got out. "What did you find? Are you okay?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Nothing's obviously missing, but things have definitely been moved around. Someone was inside." Sarah's face showed genuine concern. "But who would do this? And how did they get in without breaking anything?" "The security system was disarmed at 6:15. I told them." Someone knew the code. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father when he was stressed. "Mom, this is serious. We need to call the police right now. Someone having your security code means this isn't random." "Maybe the system malfunctioned somehow," Sarah suggested, but her voice sounded uncertain. I looked at my daughter-in-law more closely, then studying her expression. She seemed genuinely worried and confused, just as I would expect. But there was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite identify. It might have been fear, or it might have been guilt. At the time, I dismissed it as natural anxiety about the situation. "I think you should stay with us tonight," David said firmly. "This house isn't safe until we figure out what happened and change all the codes." "No," I replied, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "This is my home. I'm not going to be driven away by some prowler. I'll change the security code tonight and I'll be fine." "Mom, please reconsider," David pleaded. Sarah added her voice to his. "We have a guest room already. You'd be doing us a favor by staying. I'd worry about you all night." But something stubborn rose up in me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was an instinct I didn't yet understand. "Thank you both, but I'm staying here. I'll keep my phone right next to me and I'll call if anything else happens." After much more discussion and several promises to check in every few hours, David and Sarah reluctantly left. I stood in my driveway, watching their taillights disappear down the street, and felt more alone than I had since Frank died. But I also felt determined to understand what had really happened in my house that evening. Sleep was impossible that night. I spent hours double-checking every window, every door, every possible entry point. I changed the security system code to a number that only I knew, and I activated every sensor and alarm the system offered. But my mind kept returning to that water glass on the coffee table and the way my grandmother's safe had been moved. Around 3 in the morning, I remembered something Frank had installed that I'd completely forgotten about during all the evening's chaos. In addition to our main security system, he'd set up a backup camera in the garage that operated independently, connected to a different app on a tablet he'd kept in his workshop. The main system might have been disarmed, but this backup camera had its own power source and recording capability. With trembling fingers, I found the tablet and opened the monitoring app. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the day's recordings, fast-forwarding through hours of empty footage. Then at 6:20 p.m., just 5 minutes after the main security system had been disarmed, I saw them. Sarah's car pulled into my driveway, and she got out with someone I'd never seen before. He was a man in his mid-30s wearing a dark jacket and carrying a small bag that looked like it might contain tools. What shocked me most was how comfortable Sarah looked with him, how she led him to my front door as if she'd done it many times before. I watched in disbelief as Sarah used her spare key to let them both inside. The camera angle didn't show the interior, but it recorded their car remaining in my driveway for exactly 24 minutes. During that time, I could see shadows moving past the living room windows, confirming what Mr. Peterson had observed. At 6:44 p.m., they both emerged from the house. The man looked frustrated, shaking his head and gesturing with his hands in what appeared to be an argument with Sarah. She seemed to be trying to calm him down frequently, checking her phone and looking anxiously up and down the street. They drove away in separate cars just 8 minutes before David, Sarah, and I arrived. I watched the footage 3 more times, hoping I was somehow mistaken, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me the way I thought Mr. Peterson's might have been. But there was no denying what I saw. Sarah had brought a stranger into my house, someone who clearly had experience with safes and security systems, someone who had attempted to open my grandmother's safe. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I sat in Frank's workshop surrounded by his tools and his presence, and cried harder than I had since his funeral. The woman I'd welcomed as a daughter, the woman I'd trusted with my spare key and my security code, had violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible. But along with the pain came questions that demanded answers. Who was this man? What did Sarah need so desperately that she'd risk everything to get it? And most importantly, how long had she been planning this? I made a decision that night that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Instead of confronting Sarah immediately, instead of calling David or the police, I would investigate further. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I destroyed my son's marriage and my family's happiness, because once I revealed what I knew, there would be no going back. The next few days were the most difficult of my life. Every interaction with David and Sarah felt like walking through a minefield. When Sarah called to check on me, her voice full of apparent concern about the break-in, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. When she hugged me at dinner that Sunday, expressing relief that I was safe, I felt sick to my stomach. David, meanwhile, had become protective to an almost overwhelming degree. He called me 3 times a day, installed additional motion sensors around my house, and repeatedly urged me to consider moving to a senior community where I'd be safer. His concern was genuine and touching, which made keeping the truth from him even more painful. I spent hours researching the man I'd seen on the security footage. Using what few details I could make out, I searched social media profiles connected to Sarah's accounts. Finally, I found him. His name was Marcus Webb, and according to his LinkedIn profile, he worked in private security consulting, which I suspected was a euphemism for less legitimate activities. More disturbing were the connections I found between Marcus and Sarah on Instagram. Photos from 2 years ago showed them together at various events, always tagged at locations around Cincinnati. The timestamps indicated these photos were taken during the period when Sarah was dating David, which raised even more questions about her past and her motivations. The emotional toll of pretending everything was normal while planning my next move was exhausting. I found myself staring at family photos of Sarah, David, and me wondering how much of her affection had been genuine and how much had been calculated manipulation. Had she been targeting our family from the beginning, or had her current desperation driven her to betray people she truly cared about? 1 week after the break-in, I made my decision. I called Sarah and told her I'd decided to visit my sister in Phoenix for a long weekend, something I did once or twice a year. I need a change of scenery after all this stress, I explained. I'm leaving Thursday morning and won't be back until Sunday evening. Sarah's response was immediately supportive. That sounds wonderful, Madeline. You deserve some relaxation and family time. Don't worry about anything here. David and I will keep an eye on the house. That offer to watch my house sealed my suspicions. I spent the next 2 days preparing my trap. I installed 3 additional hidden cameras inside the house, each connected to cloud storage that would preserve footage even if the devices were discovered and destroyed. I carefully documented the exact position of every valuable item, taking photos and measurements that would provide irrefutable evidence of any theft. Most importantly, I arranged for Mr. Peterson to be my eyes and ears. I told him I was going away, but asked him to call me immediately if he saw any unusual activity. I gave him David's number as well, just in case, but I suspected David wouldn't be involved in whatever Sarah had planned. On Thursday morning, I made a great show of loading luggage into my car and driving away, making sure several neighbors saw me leave. But instead of heading to the airport, I checked into a modest hotel 15 minutes from home, positioning myself close enough to respond quickly when Sarah and Marcus made their move. The waiting was agony. Every hour that passed, without incident, made me hope I was wrong, that somehow there was an innocent explanation for what I'd seen. But on Friday evening, just after 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a notification from one of the hidden cameras. Two people had entered my house. Watching the live feed from my hotel room, I saw Sarah and Marcus enter my house with the confidence of people who belonged there. This time, Marcus carried a larger bag, clearly containing more sophisticated equipment for opening safes. They moved through my home systematically, and I realized this wasn't their first attempt. Sarah knew exactly where everything was located, suggesting she'd been gathering intelligence during her many visits. They headed straight to the bedroom, and Marcus immediately began working on the safe while Sarah acted as a lookout. His tools and technique suggested professional experience with locks and security systems. As I watched my privacy being violated and my trust being destroyed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For 45 minutes, I observed them attempting to crack the safe's combination. Marcus tried various approaches, from sophisticated electronic devices to old-fashioned manipulation techniques. Sarah seemed increasingly nervous, constantly checking her phone and occasionally arguing with him in whispered conversations. When Marcus finally succeeded in opening the safe, I saw Sarah's relief turn to excitement as they examined the contents. My grandmother's diamond ring, some of Frank's most valuable watches, and several pieces of inherited jewelry were carefully removed and placed in Marcus's bag. They were methodical and organized, clearly planning to take only the most valuable items that would be difficult to trace. That's when I made my move. I drove home as quickly as possible, but instead of bursting through the front door immediately, I positioned myself to cut off their escape routes. I quietly entered through the back door using my spare key, then moved through the house until I could hear their voices coming from the bedroom. "We should have enough now," Marcus was saying. "This ring alone will cover most of what you owe." "I can't believe I'm doing this to her," Sarah replied, and for the first time I heard genuine remorse in her voice. "She's been nothing but kind to me." "Kind doesn't pay off gambling debts," Marcus replied harshly. "And if you don't pay, they're going to hurt both you and your husband. Is that what you want?" I stepped into the bedroom doorway at that moment, and the silence that followed was deafening. Sarah dropped the jewelry box she was holding, and Marcus spun around like a cornered animal. "Hello, Sarah," I said quietly. "I think we need to talk." Sarah's face crumpled immediately. "Madeline, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I replied, looking at Marcus's bag full of my possessions. "Because it looks like my daughter-in-law has been planning to rob me, and she's brought professional help to do it." Marcus moved toward the window, clearly planning an escape, but I held up my phone. "The police are already on their way," I lied smoothly. "You'd better stay right where you are." What followed was 30 minutes of truth-telling that shattered the last of my illusions about Sarah, but also revealed the complexity of her situation. Through tears and broken explanations, the full story emerged. Sarah had developed a gambling addiction during college long before she met David. She'd managed to hide it initially, but during the first year of her marriage, the addiction had resurged. Within months, she'd accumulated nearly $40,000 in debt to people who didn't accept late payments or negotiate payment plans. Marcus wasn't just a criminal. He was a debt collector working for the people Sarah owed money to. When she couldn't pay, they threatened to hurt David as well as her. Desperate and terrified, Sarah had convinced Marcus that she could access valuable items from her mother-in-law's house items that would cover her debt and end the threats against her family. I never meant for it to go this far. Sarah sobbed. I thought I could take a few small things you might not notice right away, replace them somehow before anyone knew. But Marcus said we needed bigger items, more valuable pieces. And you thought stealing from me was better than telling David the truth? I asked. I was trying to protect him, Sarah cried. If he knew about my gambling, about the debt, about the threats, it would destroy him. And his career, his reputation, everything he's worked for could be ruined. In that moment, standing in my bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal and desperation, I faced a choice that would define the rest of our family's future. I could call the police as I should have done and watch Sarah face criminal charges that would destroy David's marriage and happiness. Or I could try to find another way, a solution that addressed the problem without devastating the people I loved. Marcus, I said finally, I want you out of my house and out of our lives permanently. If I see you anywhere near my family again, I will call the police and press full charges for breaking and entering, attempted theft, and any other crime I can think of. Marcus looked at Sarah, then at me, clearly calculating his options. She still owes the money, he said. My employers don't just forgive debt because some old lady feels sorry for her. That's not your problem anymore, I replied firmly. Find another way to collect or tell your employers. They'll have to wait. But you're done here. After Marcus left, Sarah and I sat in my living room, and I made her explain everything again, every detail of how the gambling had started, how much she owed, and what threats had been made. The conversation was painful for both of us, but it was also necessary. Sarah, I said when she finished, you have 24 hours to tell David everything. All of it. The gambling, the debt tonight, everything. If you don't tell him, I will. He'll leave me, Sarah whispered. Maybe? I agreed, that's his choice to make. But he deserves to know who he's married to, and he deserves the chance to decide whether he wants to help you or walk away. What about the money I owe? If I don't pay them back, they really will hurt David. I sighed, feeling every one of my 56 years in that moment. That's something you and David will have to figure out together. But stealing from your family isn't the answer. The next 24 hours were agony. I didn't sleep, didn't eat much, and spent most of the time staring at my phone waiting for it to ring. When David finally called, his voice was hollow with shock and hurt. Mom, Sarah told me everything. I don't know what to do. Come over, I said simply. Let's talk. When they arrived at my house together, I could see that David had been crying. Sarah looked like she hadn't slept in days. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared so many family dinners, and had the most difficult conversation of our lives. David's anger was profound but controlled. I feel like I don't know you at all, he told Sarah. How could you hide something this big? How could you steal from my mother? I was scared, Sarah replied. I thought I could fix it without anyone getting hurt. But people did get hurt, I interjected. Trust was broken, safety was violated, our family was damaged. Over the following weeks, David made the decision to help Sarah pay off the gambling debt, but only with conditions. Sarah had to enter a treatment program for addiction. They had to separate temporarily while they worked through the trust issues. And Sarah had to earn back her place in our family through actions, not just words. The healing process was slow and painful. There were times when I wondered if I'd made the right choice in not calling the police, times when David's anger seemed too deep to overcome, times when Sarah's remorse seemed insufficient for the magnitude of her betrayal. But gradually, through family counseling and honest conversation, we began to rebuild. Sarah's addiction treatment helped her understand not just her gambling problem, but the underlying issues that had led her to choose deception over honesty. David learned that love sometimes means working through problems instead of running from them. And I learned that wisdom sometimes means protecting your family in unexpected ways. 6 months later, Sarah had completed her treatment program and found a job that allowed her to begin paying David back for the money he'd spent resolving her debt. She and David were living together again, though their relationship would never be quite the same as it had been. Trust once broken leaves scars even when it heals. As for me, I made significant changes to my security systems and my policies about sharing access to my home. But more importantly, I learned that family relationships are more complex than I'd ever imagined. Love isn't just about trust and kindness. Sometimes it's about making difficult choices that protect people from themselves and each other. My grandmother's ring was returned to the safe, and Frank's watches remained in their display case. But the real treasure I'd protected was my family's future. By choosing difficult forgiveness over easy justice, I'd given David and Sarah a chance to build something stronger and more honest than what they'd had before. Looking back now, I understand that the phone call from Mr. Peterson that interrupted our family dinner wasn't just about strangers in my house. It was about discovering that the people we trust most are also capable of betraying that trust. And that sometimes the hardest choice is deciding what to do with that knowledge. Trust, I've learned, is like a mirror. Once broken, it can be repaired, but you'll always see the cracks. But sometimes those cracks let in light that helps us see more clearly than we ever did before. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making choices that hurt in the short term, but heal in ways you never expected. Today, as I sit in my garden looking at the house Frank and I built together, I feel stronger and wiser than I ever did before that terrible Thursday evening. I know now that love isn't about perfection or blind trust. It's about making conscious choices to build something good. From the broken pieces, life sometimes hands us. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have called the police immediately, or would you have tried to find another way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if it made you think differently about family trust and forgiveness. Subscribe for more true stories that explore the complicated nature of human relationships. And share this with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to stronger connections. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest choices we make are the ones that teach us the most about what really matters. Until next time, trust carefully, forgive thoughtfully, and never underestimate the power of choosing love over fear.